There are a great many religions which do not accept this teaching, which is intended to lift the seeker of the truth out of the morass of ignorance from which he wants to escape. Every one of these religions is based on a set of beliefs or creeds, in which more or less the ignorance that sustains bondage is incorporated. For this reason, the adherents of these religions are unable to accept this teaching. They seek to refute it, but in doing so, they are up against the standard of reality that has been given to us by the sages. They seek to overcome the difficulty in two ways. First, they deny the standard. All the same, they feel that it is the right one and seek to prove that the world is real according to that standard also. In doing so, they are still uneasy and relieve their consciences by inventing degrees of reality, a most unphilosophical device, condemned by all the sages. It may be here noted that a concession is made to human weakness by the sages. The world is unreal from the point of view of the absolute truth, but it is as good as real so long as ignorance retains its sway over our minds. Thus it happens that these believers have no real grievance against the sages. The teaching does not mean that the world is not real for those that fully believe that the body or the mind is the little self, who do not feel that this is ignorance and do not at all want to get rid of it. The ancient lore is twofold. One part of it is addressed to those who are not conscious of being in ignorance and therefore have no use for a teaching intended to dispel that ignorance. The other part of the ancient lore is addressed to those that are conscious of the ignorance and are in earnest to escape from it. These two parts are quite distinct. But this feature of the ancient revelation is not known to these believers. Besides, they are offended by the inevitable corollary that theirs is a lower position. They also feel it a grievance that the world, which they believe to be real, should be dismissed as unreal, and often want to quarrel with us who are followers of the sages. We, however, have no quarrel with them, as the sages have pointed out, because we realize that for them, living in ignorance, it is all right to believe as they do, and so believing to make the best of the world while it lasts. They are like dreamers who are persuaded that their dreams are real and do not want to awaken. We have begun to see that this worldly life is only a dream because the sages tell us so, and we want to awake. That the world has no existence of its own is stated by the sage of Arunachala as follows. The world and the mind arise and set together as one. But of the two, the world owes its appearance to the mind alone. That alone which is real, in which this inseparable pair, the world and the mind, has risings and settings, that reality is the one infinite consciousness, having neither rising nor setting. We are thus reminded of a fact not unknown to us, but of which the importance has till now escaped us. The world begins to appear just when the mind comes into being, after remaining merged and lost in sleep. It continues to appear only so long as the mind continues to function. It disappears with the mind when the latter is dissolved in sleep. It is seen again only when the mind comes again into being on waking. When the mind is lost in sleep, there is no world appearance. From this, it follows that neither the mind nor the world is real. This is so not only because they do not appear continuously, but also because they have no existence of their own, independently of the reality in which their risings and settings take place. Here also the standard of reality as defined by the older sages is clearly accepted and applied. It may perhaps be contended that the world does not appear only because there is no mind or senses to perceive it. The answer is very simple. It is true that in sleep there is no mind, but we are there. And if the world were real, what is there to prevent its appearing to us? That there is no mind or sense organs in sleep is no reason for the world not being seen. The real self does not need any medium to see whatever is real. The sacred lore tells us that the self is the eye of consciousness, Atman, by which alone the mind and the senses are able to perceive. This power of being aware of reality, say all the Vedantas, is never lost. We do not see the world in sleep because the world does not exist. The sage has also said the same thing in a different form when he said, "The world is not other than the body. The body is not other than the mind. The mind is not other than the primal consciousness. The primal consciousness is not other than reality. That exists unchanging, in peace." The question may be asked how we can be sure of the existence of reality, which is here said to be the source from which mind and world arise, and into which they set. The answer is that this unreal pair cannot appear and disappear without something real in which they can have their risings and settings. Our chief difficulty in accepting this teaching is this. We have become accustomed to the thought that the world exists outside of us, and that we ourselves are the body, or that we are the mind, which is in the body. We have also assumed that the mind is an exceedingly small thing as compared with the world, and that it makes it difficult for us to conceive how this wide world can be in the mind, or can be one with the mind. This difficulty is connected with another of our false assumptions, namely that time and space are real, because time and space are inseparable elements of the world appearance. When the world appears, it does so with time and space, and when it vanishes in sleep or in the egoless state, time and space do not remain. The simple solution of the difficulty lies in this, that all these assumptions are outgrowths of the primary ignorance, the ego sense, and are therefore discredited. Because of this notion, namely that the world is outside of us and consists of the objects perceived through our sense organs, the world is taken to be objective reality, as opposed to mere thoughts, which are admitted to be subjective and therefore unreal. The sages tell us that this objectivity is a gratuitous assumption, that in fact the world exists only in the mind. The sage of Arunachala states the position this way. The world is nothing but the 5 sensations, namely sounds and the rest of its kind. Thus the world consists of the objects of the 5 sense organs. The one mind becomes aware of these 5 sensations through the 5 senses. That being the case, how can the world be other than the mind? Here the sage draws our attention to a fact upon which philosophers of all grades are now agreed, thanks to the elaborate demonstration by Immanuel Kant, namely that what we all perceive is not the world itself, whose reality is in question, but an ever-shifting mass of sensations and vibrations, sounds and contacts, forms and tastes and smells. That these sensations are not outside, if there be an outside at all, but only inside, that is, in the mind, is undeniable. This is freely admitted, even by some scientists who do not profess to be philosophers. They are thoughts arising in the mind. Along with these thoughts arises the thought that there is an outside in which things exist, which are the origin of these sensations. It may be noted that an exactly similar conviction arises during dreams also, and persists in full force until the dreams come to an end. Those that maintain the objective reality of the world are bound to prove by unobjectionable evidence that these sensations are really caused by objects existing outside, because the burden of proof lies on them. The presumption is against their case, for the reason shown by the sages. The world, they say, is real. They contend that it does not become unreal simply because it does not appear to some who are unable to see it, being asleep. They allege that while some are asleep, others keep awake and see the world, so the world is being seen all the time by someone or other. They add up the waking states of all persons whom they suppose to exist as distinct individuals, and thus make out that there is a continuous world appearance. And this, they say, proves that the world is real. If a person awakening from sleep remembers that he did not see the world during sleep, and thus doubts whether the world existed during the time he slept, he has only to ask someone who remained awake, and learn from him that the world was seen by him during the interval. The evidence is inconclusive. In fact, it is not evidence at all. Let us take the case of a sleeper who on waking wants to ascertain by unimpeachable evidence whether or not the world continued to exist during the time he slept. Let us even suppose that this inquirer assumed that the time existed when he slept and is therefore real. He is asked to accept the evidence of those that did not sleep at the time. But these so-called witnesses are themselves part of the world whose reality is in question. The sleeper doubts the reality of the world because it did not appear to him in sleep, even though the world has begun to appear again on his waking. Does not this doubt cover these witnesses also? He was not aware of them in his sleep, as the sage pointed out to the objector. Therefore, their reality is as doubtful as the reality of the world as a whole. How is that doubt to be dispelled? For the awakened sleeper to admit them as witnesses, there must be some independent evidence to prove that they are real. No such evidence is offered. He is supposed to accept their reality simply because he sees them. That he had seen them before he slept does not make any difference, because the same is the case of the world. Thus the argument is simply a subtle way of begging the question. The presumption that the world is unreal is not only unaffected, but strengthened. It is as near conclusive proof as can be expected.